Okay, so we're now live on Facebook. Hi, Lean. I can't hear you. Wait, let me unmute you.
Hi, Sophia. We get face to face.
Yeah. Thanks for joining. I'm happy to see you here.
No, I'm very interested in this, obviously. Yeah, and I know Carole and
Lisette.
and Lisette did a good plug for you.
Okay, so ready live on Facebook. I'll start recording once we start, and I think we're gonna start in about 4 minutes.
Hi, Lynn. You're muted.
Okay.
Oh.
I think we unmuted her together.
Well, unmute. Hi.
How are you?
I'm very well. How's the baby?
He's good. He just turned 4 months. He's growing so fast.
Yeah.
How's yours? Well, we can talk another time.
Is anybody saying anything? I can't
We're
hear.
gonna start in 1 minute. The
Oh,
session.
okay. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
We're still waiting for people to join.
Hi, Gilda.
Hi, Lisette. No.
I lost it again. I need you. There it is. I got it back. Is that it? But what's that sign on there? All right. Thanks.
Okay, in order to respect everybody's time, I think we should get started. So Adriana, if you would like to screen the clip, that would be great.
Very good.
I will Iraqi Jewish community began 2,700 years ago. It's a complex tapestry woven with beauty and sorrow. Just as the Tigris and Euphrates flow together, Iraqi Jews continue their journey of identity.
Adriana, you have to share the screen. We don't see it.
The religious and cultural heritage, once ripped from their grasp. The story of the Iraqi Jewish community began 2,700 years ago. It's a complex tapestry woven with beauty and sorrow. Just as the Tigris and Euphrates flow together, Iraqi Jews continue their journey of identity. Fragments of their religious and cultural heritage, once ripped from their grasp, have unexpectedly surfaced with the miraculous discovery of the Iraqi Jewish Archives. Could it be that these religious books, Torahs, and school records, precious markers of the soul, are now drifting back into their lives?
Thank you, Adriana.
Thank you.
Okay, so just to introduce myself, my name is Sarah Levin, and I am the Executive Director of JIMENA. So we want to thank you so much for joining JIMENA's Zoom event today with Carole Basri and Adriana Davis. So first of all, I hope that you and your loved ones are safe and healthy during this strange period of COVID-19. I'd like to disclose to you that this meeting is being recorded and will be available on JIMENA's website and on our Facebook page. So our website is actually typed out in the chat box. It's www.jimena.org. For those of you who are unfamiliar with JIMENA, we're a Jewish nonprofit organization based in San Francisco, California. Our mission is to achieve universal recognition for the heritage and history of the 1 million Jewish refugees from the Middle East and North Africa and their descendants. Our programs aim to ensure that the accurate history of Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews is incorporated into mainstream Jewish and Middle Eastern narratives in order to create balance in attitudes, narratives, and discourse about Middle Eastern refugees and the modern Jewish experience. We operate through an education and engagement initiative and an advocacy program. So through this period of quarantine and social distancing, we're offering a number of web-based programs, which you can learn about by visiting our website. So with me is Sapir Taib, JIMENA's program director. Sapir, can you say hi?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Carole and Adriana, for doing this important session. I'm so happy to see some familiar faces from Israel, Shula, that I think now is in New York, and Lean from London, and so many people from so many places that join us today.
Thanks. So in order to keep this an orderly conversation, we have everybody muted, and we ask that you please remain muted throughout the talk. We're hoping that you all have a lot of questions, and we're asking for you to write them in the chat box. So for those of you who are less familiar with Zoom, you can find the chat box on the bottom of the Zoom screen. There's a little box that says chat. If you click on it, you'll see a white chat box will open on the right-hand side of your screen. At the bottom of that chat box, at the very bottom, there's a little line that says type message here. It's right in that space that we are encouraging you to type in your questions as they arise throughout the talk. And also feel free to introduce yourselves and let us know who you are and where you're located. So we are so lucky today to be joined by Carole Basri and Adriana Davis to talk about Iraqi Jews and the Iraqi Jewish Archive. Carole Basri is someone who I've gotten to know through the years, and she truly is an incredible leader, not just in relation to the Iraqi Jewish Archive issue, but in the issue of redress and justice for Jewish refugees from the Middle East and North Africa. Carole is an Iraqi filmmaker, and she is a lawyer of Iraqi Jewish descent. Most of her productions focus on the history of the Jews in Iraq, and as she documents her ancestral roots and discusses Jewish tradition in Iraq. She is the president of Corporate Lawyering Group, and she's a visiting professor at Peking University School of Transactional Law and the Pericles Law School in Moscow, Russia. In 2003, Ms. Basri was a member of the U.S. State Department's Future of Iraq project and a member of the Coalition Provisional Authority with the Iraqi Reconstruction Development Council for Ambassador Bremer in Baghdad, Iraq. Carole has executive produced a trilogy of films about the Iraqi Jewish community, including The Life of Frank Eni, Searching for Baghdad, and The Last Jews of Baghdad. This trilogy has screened at over 80 premier film festivals in the United States, Canada, Israel, and Europe, and was featured on PBS and JLTV. She's joined by Adriana Davis. Adriana has worked in film, television, and radio as a writer, producer, editor, and voiceover artist since 1991. She is the founder of D Squared Media, a full-service production company based in New York City with corporate and film clients. Ms. Davis is the co-director, producer, writer, and editor of the acclaimed trilogy of documentaries about Iraqi's Jewish community and history. So we will start this by me asking Carole and Adriana a few very general questions. We have up to an hour. So towards the end of the meeting, Carole will start going through all of the questions and answering some of them. So to start with, welcome Carole and Adriana. Thank you for doing this. I know that there's a lot of interest in the Iraqi Jewish Archive and in Iraqi Jewish history. So I think to start with, Carole, can you just give us some background on Iraqi Jews? How and when did the Jews get to Iraq, and when did they leave and why?
I'd be happy to. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate JIMENA and all the work you're doing. And thank you very much, Sarah. Sarah Levin. It's really an honor to be in this presentation with Adriana Davis, who made this possible. So I really want to just express my thanks to everyone involved in the production. Some of you are watching, and I appreciate that. To start with, the Iraqi Jews go back to the destruction of the Babylonian, the destruction of the first temple. And they go back even further because some Jews were actually living in Babylon before 587 BCE. But the Iraqi Jews go back at least to the time of the first temple and then its destruction. And that means it's a community that's existed for 2,700 years. It's a long time community, probably one of the oldest Jewish communities in the world outside of Judea. And so it is a continuous community until the current era. And now, however, there are only, unfortunately, 4 to 5 Jews left in Iraq. And so it is really a community that's dwindled from 1948, when it was anywhere from 125,000 to 165,000 Jews. There are different estimates that different people had given, but we're now down to only really 4 or 5 people. The majority of the Jews from Iraq have gone to Israel, as well as some have gone to England, the United States, Canada, Europe, some are in Australia, really all over the world. They've been dispersed. Now, most, however, went to Israel. And interestingly enough, 1/4 of all Jews in Israel have either Iraqi roots or were born in Iraq or Iraqi descendants. So it's an amazing number in Israel. Further, I wanted to point out that the Iraqi Jewish community went into exile at the time of the First Temple, and they took many of the eminent people, and the background is a famous piece that's at the Babylonian Heritage Center that shows the waters of Babylon. And if you read Psalm 137, it talks about by the waters of Babylon, we wept when we remembered Zion. And so it's even on our Tehillim, the Psalms of David. From there, they stayed 70 years, and they were allowed to return by Cyrus to build the second temple. And that second temple was very important to the Jews. However, only a third of the Jews left Baghdad and the surrounding region in Iraq that they'd settled in, which was at that point Babylonia under Nebuchadnezzar. They were able to leave under Cyrus after 70 years. And at that point, there is a large community in Iraq. The significance of that community to me is that it was the first time that Jews lived outside of Israel, ancient Judea, and remained Jews without the temple for those 70 years. And then beyond that, when they continued as a community, and they really triumphed by being an extant community. They created a lot of the things that we look at in terms of creating a home-based religion. And so it's very important. They created synagogues and they created places to study Torah. And then you had the famous academies where they studied Torah. And those were in Iraq. So that's very, and again, I'm going to say them incorrectly, but the two academies competed with each other. Those academies then were the precursors for Oxford and Cambridge, and later for Yale and Harvard. So it's very interesting how this community excelled. And when you study Torah, you studied everything. Secular subjects were part of the Torah. If you read the Gemara and you read what happened in the Babylonian Talmud, they were discussing all parts of life. It wasn't just a limitation. It was a vast inquiry into what is this world, and all of it was holy. It was beautiful. What they took was they took an ancient religion and they modernized it in such a way that it could exist and be vibrant to this day. And I think that's really the great legacy. We have as many prophets that have shrines in Iraq as there are in Israel. It's amazing. It's an amazing place that existed for 2,700 years. And as most Iraqi Jews, I'm very proud to be an Iraqi Jew, a Babylonian Jew. So we have many people on the phone, on this video conference that know quite a bit, but I want to make sure you understand the significance of this and the Babylonian Talmud, which is a Talmud that we use today with the Jerusalem Talmud. That many of the decisions that are in the Babylonian Talmud actually take precedence. It's a very interesting thing. And there was a flow between Israel and also Babylon in terms of religious knowledge and dissertation and halachic law. And that created a vibrant atmosphere. But even within Iraq, the different Torah study centers in Iraq also created that mix of vibrancy within there. And again, it has been heralded in higher education. So this process continued, and then we have the rise. I'm going to just take it a little quickly, but we have the rise of Islam, and the demitude that came in 632 by the Edict of Omar, and Jews become, and Christians are people of the book and become what's called second-class citizens. So they have certain requirements, and those requirements waxed and waned. Couldn't testify against a Muslim. You couldn't have, you couldn't ride on a horse if there was a Muslim walking. There were all kinds of restrictions, but the most important part that we see was there was a special tax, a Jazita tax, and that tax was very, very important because we even heard about it with ISIS. There were taxes on the Christians, and these taxes could be very, very steep. So we get a situation where the Jews wax and wane in terms of persecution under the Muslims. Sometimes it was good, and sometimes it was more difficult. And that leads us into the more common era when we talk about the Ottoman Empire, which really ceased to exist with the end of World War I. And then we have this famous San Remo Convention, which is 100 years old as of just this past, I think, week and a half. So, and that enshrined the idea that the Balfour Declaration, which the British made, should really be enshrined in international law. And they created 21 Arab states and 1 Jewish state. And then that became then part of the UN Charter when the UN was started. And therefore, we have the beginning of modern Iraq, and we have King Faisal coming to the fore. And so things move along. With the British comes certainly less discrimination for the Jews living in Iraq, and they rise in the government. The first finance minister is a Jew, and he's very good and very memorialized in Iraq even today because he negotiated with the British that oil would be sold on the gold standard. So he becomes a very important figure. And this goes on. King Faisal actually voted in the League of Nations for the creation of the State of Israel. So it just shows you how things were. This is the 20s, had things developed with the founding of Iraq. And then we have the Jewish community, which started to have problems in 1933. So the first pogroms were actually against the Assyrian Christians, and they killed Assyrian Christians, about 1,000 of them, in 1932. And you would have thought it would go in that direction because the Ottoman Empire had kind of gotten into that direction with the Armenian massacre of Christians, but it didn't. The turning point was Hitler and Germany, and they had an ambassador come to Iraq named Fritz Grabo. And Fritz Grabo was very important, and other ambassadors like him were sent throughout the Middle East by the Germans. And so the people in these countries, the Arabs, saw the United Kingdom and France as really colonial powers. But the Germans, because they had lost in World War I, were seen as kind of the nationalists. And so you had Arabs starting in the early 1930s and even in the late 20s asking to be part of the Nazi Party. And they would say, no, be friends of the Nazi Party. You can't really join. And you had Fritz Grabo, the ambassador from Germany in Iraq, doing a number of things, such as reprinting Mein Kampf in Arabic, but taking out the parts on the Arab status there. He switched it around a little to soften it. And he also had a radio station, a newspaper. There were a lot of things to spread propaganda. It paid off very quickly. The first anti-Jewish laws were passed in 1934, and they dealt with having to post a bond to leave the country if you were a Jew. The first time it said, if you're a Jew, you have to post this bond to leave the country. And then in 1935, you had another thing happen, and that was quotas in the school system for secondary and higher education, quotas only for Jews. And then in 1936, you had requirements that by law, you had to have a Muslim partner, 50-50 partner if you needed a license from the government. So if you were doing transactions that required a license, such as running a bank or anything else that required a license from the government for that profession, you had to have a 50-50 partner. And so you get a situation where the Jews are starting to have their worlds getting smaller and smaller, but being able to cope. But then in 1939, we have starting the influence of Hajjamil Husseini, who they had thrown out of the Jerusalem and thrown out of Palestine under the British, moved to Lebanon, to Beirut, and then he slips out of there and comes to Iraq, and he starts fomenting really an uprising. Now, in 1939, there were Nazi youth group styled parties. Can't be Nazi because they didn't accept Arabs, but there were Nazi style youth group parties in Iraq. And those then also in the school system, there was a curriculum that was anti-Jewish that was brought into the curriculum there. And that's where we are until we get then to the pro-Nazi uprising of the Faru, led by Hajjamil Husseini. And they were kind of the four generals in Iraq, Iraqis. And interestingly enough, it lasts from April until Shavuot. And it's finally put down by the British. They stay on the outskirts of Baghdad, and then they come in after Shavuot. But in that period of 2 or 3 days, it's estimated that at least 180 people were killed. Many were hurt and mutilated. But the number is as high as 800 because there was a mass burial site. So that's what happened. It is considered the Kristallnacht of the Middle East. And so at any rate, this is the next phase. And we have the Farhud. And at this point, the story starts to intertwine with the Iraqi Jewish Archives, because the Iraqi Jewish Archives includes materials from the Frank Eni School, and my grandfather started that school, and it was started precisely because students were scared to go back to school after the Farhud, June 1st and 2nd of 1941. They were scared to go back, and my grandfather put together a school over the summer, rented rooms, and a school opened up in September so that Jewish students who did not want to go back to public schools or other schools where they might be harassed and discriminated against decided that he would open up this school. Now, then we have, and I just want to continue on with the history, we have the State of Israel in 1948. And with the State of Israel, a number of discriminatory laws come in against the Jews, culminating in two very important laws. And these laws talk about rescinding the nationality of Jews. And this law was passed, and it was passed March 4th, 1950. It said, it is required a Jew of his own free will and choice to divest his citizenship by signing a special form in the presence of a government official. The 1950 ordinance did not mention the disposition of property of those who forfeited their citizenship. And it is said that over 90,000 Jews signed up and gave up their citizenship at that point because they had not been able from 1948 till 1950 to leave the country legally with a passport or keep their jobs. Many of them were thrown out of their jobs if they were government. There was an exorbitant tax paid on the Jews of Iraq to pay for the Iraqi army, which then invaded the new state of Israel. So they had to pay for the war effort. And that was an enormous sum of money even then. It was over $80 million. In today's terms, that would be billions of dollars. So these are the things that happened. And at any rate, at this point, the Iraqi Jews, however, felt that they needed to leave, okay? And because of that, they signed up to leave. Nobody thought, even Israel thought, maybe they'd get 10,000 people coming at most. They didn't really know where to put all these people, in fact, but they said we could never get that many people coming. Then a second law, well, let me read a quote from Henry Mack, the British ambassador to Iraq, in March 21st, 1950 dispatch to the British Foreign Secretary and Member of Parliament, Ernest Bevin. Discrimination against Jews is applied in practice. In the southern states of America, it is said to be difficult for a Negro to obtain his rights against white Americans in the courts or to send his own son to study alongside his fellow citizens in higher colleges. An Iraqi Jew today suffers similar disabilities. So they had trouble getting into advanced to the universities. They had trouble studying. They, in fact, weren't allowed to come into the universities. And one university, El Hikmah, which was run by a Catholic group, closed down because they did not want to stop taking Jewish students. Baghdad University had closed its door to Jewish students. So this was the situation they were in. And the government work that they had, the licenses they were not allowed to use that they had, it was a terrible, terrible situation. And their bank accounts were frozen. So they gave it up, thinking that they'd be able to leave legally. They'd give up their citizenship and be able to leave. But then on March 10th, 1951, on a Shabbat, on a Saturday, the Iraqi Parliament and Senate held an extraordinary session, submitting and passing a law that deprived the now 70,000 stateless Iraqi Jews of their property under law number 5, regulation 3. And under this law, it stated that the Jews who had given up and registered to leave the country, giving up their citizenship, would now be deprived of their property. And what were they allowed to leave with at this point? Okay, well, their bank accounts were frozen, and the government would only allow them to take out the following items: 3 summer outfits, 3 winter outfits, 1 pair of shoes, 1 blanket, 6 pairs of underwear, socks, sheets, 1 wedding ring, 1 wristwatch, 1 thin bracelet, and no more than 50 dinars. This is to start a new life. Any Jew that attempted to sell his property upon leaving had great difficulty, and in fact, there was a fatwa. So they had to sell or abandon their property. That, in fact, March 30th, 1951, a fatwa was passed by a Muslim religious ban and published in the newspaper that said that Muslims were forbidden to purchase Jewish property. What about their Torah scrolls? What about their prayer books? Already, they could not take these out. Photographs couldn't take out. None of the significant religious artifacts that they had, including Torahs, including candelabras, Hanukkahs, all of this had to be left behind. And of course, all their scholarship of the rabbis over all these centuries and millenniums had to be left behind. In fact, we don't know the extent of what's left behind. They couldn't even take out community records. They couldn't take out anything with them except the prescribed things. And people were strip searched, and they were doing it under pain of jail or death. So this is a situation Iraqi Jews were in. And so they left en masse, or they fled, abandoning everything to try to escape through Shatt al-Arabi, the Gulf, or they tried to leave by going through Kurdistan. And the Kurds were very generous about helping the Jews who tried to go, and helped smuggle them out very often to Iran, and at that time, you know, the Persian area that was in the north beyond Kurdistan. And so there was a remnant of 10,000 Jews that were remaining. And by the way, the US government under Harry Truman organized the OAS, at that time that was the CIA, but originally it was the OAS, to have Alaska Airlines fly, and they created an Alaska Airlines, to fly in, to pick up people, take them to Cyprus, and then from there they could touch down in Cyprus and go on the same plane to Israel. And it was, according to the United States, the largest airlift of people that had ever occurred at that time. So it was amazing. But what did they find when they got to Israel? They found a country that had started with 650,000 people, and by 1952 had 1.3 million people. And because of that explosion of population, they were taken to the Mabarot. They were taken to tent camps. The conditions were very, very difficult. I'm not going to go through them, but these were refugee camps. And if you go to the earlier documentaries I've done, like Last Jews of Baghdad, you'll see pictures, archival pictures of that, and also film from newsreel at the time that was done by BBC and Pathé, that you can see exactly what it looked like. The mud in the rainy season, the blistering heat, what that was like, very, very hard. But the Iraqi Jews persevered. And as I said, they were extremely successful when they got to Israel, worked themselves up, and were able to really become a mainstay of Israeli society.
Carole, I'm going to cut you off. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure we have enough time. And I know that there are so many more stories. There's the history of the Jews that stayed in Iraq, which is a very tragic and sad one. But I want to speed up to 2003, when US forces entered Saddam Hussein's intelligence building and found nearly 3,000 books and tens of thousands of documents confiscated from the Iraqi Jewish people when they fled in the 50s and later. This trove of material is what would become the Iraqi Jewish Archive, or the IJA, and it was brought to the United States for preservation and exhibition, and here it remains still. So can you just talk about the discovery of the archive and the process of saving the archive, and what's been happening with the archive these last 10 years?
Well, I have to give you like a 20-second piece in there of when the '67 war occurred. It led to these show trials, the hanging of 9 Jews in Tariq Square. And that hanging was a very devastating thing and brought the community down to only 3,000 people. It was also the rise of Saddam Hussein, who's integral to the story of saving the Iraqi Jewish Archive. he became vice president under El Becker, his uncle, and that uncle had also been involved in the Faru that we talked about, and that Mukhubarat, which organized the show trials and put the Jews on trial, also collected material around Baghdad, and they collected it from the Jewish community, and it was set up as a section in the Mukhubarat headquarters, the secret police headquarters. There was a section on the Jews, and this section is where this archive was found. How was it found? Well, Harold Rhodes was a key person in that. Now, I was in Iraq at that time, which is amazing, the coincidences here, but I was there with the Coalition Provisional Authority. And I knew Ahmed Chalabi. In fact, he was very helpful in getting me records of the Jews.
Tell us who that is.
There.
Not everybody knows who that is.
Ahmed Chalabi was head of the opposition party to Saddam Hussein in exile. And he was working in the United States, and he was also head of the group that they set up in Iraq as an advisory group of Iraqis. And so he was head of that advisory group. And he was a very important figure, and people would come to him and, you know, tell him who they were and that they wanted to work with the US and whatever. And so he was getting a lot of information. I just want you to cut away for 1 second. I need to take one short break because I may lose my battery, and I don't want that to happen. Okay, hold on, be right there. If I could ask Adriana to just come in and talk for 1 minute, okay?
Sure. So Carole gave us all that wonderful background information. What happened in 2003 was the US had bombed the Mukhubarat building. And when they did, as we like to call it in the film, a series of miracles really happened. First, that when the bombs hit the building, they didn't destroy all that property that's in the basement that Carole described in the Israelis and Jewish sections, as they called it. Then what the bomb did was burst a water pipe, and everything in the basement was flooded. All of the material that is currently what we call the Iraqi Jewish Archives was underwater, or as I love the expression, under very dirty water. And it was really hard for anybody to think that you could resurrect or keep anything from that. But that's the next step in the miracle, was that Harold Rhodes was told about these archives being there around the same time in 2003 by Ahmed Chalabi, who was told about it from a confidential informant who said that there was all these archives in the basement of the secret police headquarters and that they should go out and be rescued. And Harold saw it as his personal mission to do this and proceeded to get to work at getting all the material out. They started by hand and started pulling things out of the basement, trying to learn about preservation techniques as they went along to try to save all this waterlogged material. It finally took the interceding by the US government to send the right type of equipment. And that happened because Harold then asked people that he knew in the State Department to be able to intercede with as high levels up as the Secretary of Defense, as well as others. And they did. The Americans did help. And then the National Archives got involved and sent over trucks in order to fly the material out, and eventually found its way here. But it took about 10 years for them to get the material to the point where it could be all dried out. I don't know if Carole's back up there, but so from there, the material had started to be digitized, which brings us up to today, but not all the material has been digitized or has been exhibited for everybody to have access to.
Carole, you're muted. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, and one more point should be made. Not only was not everything digitized, but, sorry, not only was not everything digitized, but we don't even have an inventory of what was there.
So Harold is actually, he just sort of raised his hand in the chat box. Is it okay if
Okay,
he
Edwin.
comes in for a minute and introduces himself?
I would
I don't
love
know
that.
if he
Edwin is
wants
a
to.
key
Harold, if you don't
figure
want to,
in
that's
the
okay.
documentary.
Harold, yes.
Please, I'd love to hear.
You're muted, Harold. You have to unmute yourself. Hi.
Look, I'm going to do another webinar myself. Lynn Julius knows more about the details of when, I think at the end of the month, on how we discovered it. It's just a series of miracles. And thank God, the right people at the right time, right place. Ahmed Chalabi, without him, this would not have happened. He paid for it all in the beginning. And it's simply let's call it an appetizer for the future. Carole, you take over because it's you're the one who made the movie, and you've been awesome here.
Well, I just want to say there are so many things that we found, and the string of miracles, one of them was just finding 3 books of the Ben Ish Chai that got published. So you'll hear more about that in the documentary, but the miracles that went on tell me that there are more miracles yet to happen. And I think actually this is miraculous because, and we're going to talk a little bit in later questions, but it really talks about what is going to happen to all of the legacy, the artifacts of Jews from Arab countries. And I want to give you the list of countries we're talking about. So you'll understand the magnitude. Algeria, Syria, Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Morocco, Turkey, Tunisia, and there's probably more going to be added to that list. And it's not just about the Jewish archives and Jewish artifacts. It's about artifacts from Christians, Mandeans, Yazidis, and everything else. This is a very important and big story that I would have never thought it would start with an archive, which much of it is from just the Franchini School, which Adriana and I documented all the way back in the life of Franchini, started in '95, but the final version I think was 2001, Adriana?
Yes, we revised.
So we go back a long time on this story, and it's been fascinating because it really has been a kind of a journey that we're on, and miracles keep happening. I mean, the fact that we have the most amazing pictures from Harold Rhodes, they're really beautiful, or that we have Edwin Shuker telling us firsthand what it was like to see things from this archive that were personal to him. Amazing. And I know Edwin's on here, and I'm so grateful for him because we cannot say the word dirty water without having his image come to our mind. And that's because documents that he went to school at the Franchini School came forward. And then miraculously, I mean, I was just like, after we made the movie in 2001, Adriana shows me footage from the school that actually was there. And all of a sudden, we're looking at the corridors, we're looking at the classroom, we're looking at the students. And we have documented what my grandfather used to say, which is there were Muslim and Christian students that he had in the school. 80% was Jewish, but he wanted to make sure that there were Muslim and Christian students because that would be a safeguard. And that kind of philosophy being backed up by an expose by the BBC that was shot at the time of the hangings, which is why I wanted to go through that piece of history with the hangings, is an amazing thing. And the school endured, and these archives endured through a series of miracles. This was the only school kept open in 1969, in fact, until it was closed in the early 70s, and it became a community center. And it became a community center. Why? Because nothing could be taken out of the bank accounts or the endowments for other places to exist. And because of that, that's how food was gotten into the community during that time when everything was closed down. That's how money could be distributed to poor families, and people who couldn't afford their children to go to school could go to a school, a very good school. And the more I learn about this story, because my grandfather didn't talk too much about it, the more I'm really surprised and amazed at what he was capable of doing in terms of, you know, tzedakah. So
Yeah.
it matters a lot to me. And he always told me, I said, why did you put your name on the school? Because I don't hear about anything else you've ever done, and you've never put your name on anything. And he said, because if something went wrong at the school, I wanted people to know where to find me. And I said, did that ever happen? I said, yes. He said, people complained about the science labs were not good enough, so I put in new science labs. People said the library wasn't extensive enough. I put in more in the library. I said, when people complained about anything, I took it seriously and saw it as an opportunity to improve. And he hired a wonderful principal. One of the people we were able to have is Richard Ovadia. His father, Abdullah Ovadia, was the principal of the school, and he went to the school. And a blessed memory, he's not with us anymore, but we were able to capture him on film and talk about how the school had the cutting edge curriculum in Iraq, and that Abdullah Ovadia was also teaching at Baghdad University. He's an amazing person. And this is the kind of person that led the school under my grandfather's request that this be the best school in Iraq.
That's amazing.
And it taught
Carole, I'm
English,
going to cut you off
French,
one
and
more
Arabic.
time because time is
Sure.
starting to run short, and I want to make sure we have a few minutes for questions. I just have one last question for you. So the
Of
Iraqi
course.
Jewish Archive is one of several instances where the American government has signed agreements recognizing Arab government seizures of Jewish property. So as
Yes.
you know, our government has been signing memorandums of understandings, MOUs, between the US and foreign governments that blockade the entry of art and cultural property to the United States. And this essentially
Correct.
denies Jews from Arab countries the rights to their heritage that was taken from them. Can you just talk a little bit about the MOU issue and its connection to the Iraqi Jewish Archive, this pattern of abuses that's taking place right here in the United States? And then we'll open it up for a couple of questions. Time really is running short though, so we have only about 12 minutes left.
Okay, well, to start with, the MOUs follow the fact that there was a lot of resistance in the Iraqi Jewish community, and then by the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations led by Malcolm Homeline at the time, and he's still very active there, and a whole group of people like B'nai B'rith and everything else. And we felt and feel very strongly that this is our heritage and that we don't have anything else. If we had more, I would know about it because I've been making documentaries and not finding footage, not finding articles, not finding the kind of material that you usually do if you do a documentary. And I end up with talking heads, which is not a good thing. So these materials are very, very important. We don't have a full inventory, we need them. Now, there was an Emergency Protection Act passed for Iraqi objects in 2004, fine. But it was amended in 2008 to include things like Torah scrolls, antiques, and it's very, very detailed on what kind of Jewish material would be covered. And if anything on or before 1990, that has to be returned to Iraq. And it was passed effective April 30th, 2008. And it literally talks about Torah portions, scrolls, everything. Unbelievable. Jewish writing, Judeo-Arabic writing, the whole thing. And similar provisions were then passed for Christians in that and for other minority groups. Now, that's under the cultural property laws. After that, they decided it was better to do it through the State Department Cultural Property Committee, And that cultural property committee has signed MOUs, which you were referring to, with Algeria, Syria, Egypt, Libya, and Yemen, and proposed with Morocco, Turkey, and Tunisia. Now, the problem there is that it also wants this Jewish property under the cultural property laws. However, that is a denial of two things. The first is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was signed in December 10th, 1948, with the start of the UN, that says that this property is, under the Universal Heritage Act, should not be the property of these governments. And I'll just give you a quote from there. That it can't be any property. Here we go. Sorry, 1 second. Get my papers out. Under Article 17, everyone has a right to own property alone as well as in association with others. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his property. That's the Universal Declaration of Rights, enshrined in the UN, signed by the US and Iraq. Then we get, amazingly enough, the Cultural Property Act. The Cultural Property Act is not supposed to cover anything that is not archaeological or ethnographic. And it defines ethnographic as tribal or not from an urban center. Well, the Jews lived in urban centers. That's where they created their Torahs. And they're certainly not a tribal group living out in the, outskirts of the country. They're a major force, and their art and their materials do not fall under the classification of the Cultural Property Act. So their basis of the MOUs doesn't work. Now, further than that, it's important that we act now because we just found an article in doing the research now that shows, according to Kurdistan 24, that the US has signed an agreement to return the Jewish Iraqi archives, which they call the material on Jewish expulsion, with the Anfal campaign archive. And I, in fact, was involved in the Anfal case. And I don't know where it is from North Carolina, but at any rate, the article was February 9th, 2020, and says that the material go back in 2021. We don't know the date, we don't know when, but I beseech the State Department, Secretary Pompeo, and President Trump to please try to stop this, because we don't even know what's in the archives. Just to find the Ben Ish Chai, we had to ask a senator to allow us to intercede to get us permission to go in and look at a little scrap of paper that people saw that they gave out at the beginning of digitizing, when they didn't digitize everything, that they showed a few things. And fortunately, Sephardic Heritage Museum in Brooklyn was able to notice the writing of the Ben Ish Chai. And I would like to say that there are many places that would like to be repositories for this material. That is not a problem, but it should stay with the Jewish community. And this has a larger meaning to all of the ethnically cleansed groups, religious groups throughout the Middle East.
What is that?
I really think it's important.
What is that? I mean, you've interviewed a lot of people and you're very well connected to minority groups from the Middle East and North Africa. What does this archive signify? What does it mean to Iraqi Jews? And what do these documents and confiscated property, what's the value of it?
Well, once these documents go back, it will put the stamp of approval by the United States on expropriated property from ethnically cleansed groups belonging to the countries that ethnically cleanse these people. And it creates a problem. For example, in 2016, there was a news report from a very prominent news outlet that a Yemenite Jew was leaving, and two people helped them leave with the Torah. A family Torah, a family Torah. They thought it belonged to them. And in fact, in Middle Eastern Sephardic communities, we give those Torahs on loan. Most of the Torahs from Myanmar, I've been to Burma, they've been taken out of the synagogue there, and they've been taken to where that family now resides. Okay? It's written in the inscription that this is the family that donated it for the purpose of being in that synagogue while they're there. They can take it with them. That is the tradition. So here we have Torahs, and we're being told that it has to be taken from us. And there's no limit to that. They could come into our museums. They could come into our homes and take things that we are privileged enough to have somehow gotten out and say, no, it is the property of a country that ethnically cleansed you or your parents or your grandparents. And that would be a travesty. We have nothing to show that we lived in these countries except the wonderful cooking. And that's it. I told you what the list of things was that we could take out. We need to be able to take out our heritage. And by providence, by miracles, we have the Iraqi Jewish Archive here. One of the groups, interestingly enough, when we had the last Cultural Affairs meeting, January, I believe it was January 20th, 21st, over Turkey and Tunisia, and talking about the memorandum there. It was the 21st, 22nd. The Cultural Property Committee met. I was on that and I spoke, and one of the groups that spoke there was the Association of Museums. And the reason is museums are concerned. We give it back to places that are, let's say, having difficulties like they're having in Yemen right now, or difficulties in other places like Iraq, and we could be in a state of turmoil. Certainly no Jew from Iraq can go back to Iraq to see the archives in person. And we already know that it hasn't been fully inventoried, and we already know that they didn't analyze it to the point where they knew what they were looking at. They only digitized something, and I had been asking for the list of everything in the Iraqi Jewish Archive, and I can't get that list. And I have asked since I knew about the Iraqi Jewish Archive.
So if
That
anyone, sorry, I was going to say we have only about a minute left. I want to ask you one last question, but I want to encourage everyone to visit www.jimena.org. We also have a website built on this subject. I'll type it in the chat box here in a second, where you can learn more about this subject and you can read articles. I want to give a plug for your movie. Someone asked, how can we access the documentary? When can we watch it? When will it be available?
Well, it was supposed to be shown in the American Sephardic Federation Festival, the New York Sephardic Federation Festival on March 17 at the Center for Jewish History. But because of coronavirus, we had to postpone that. We're looking for outlets. If anybody knows of any outlets with any of the streaming groups, we would be very interested in that. Again, you never know who's listening to this. You know, something like Amazon or any of the others that are out there, we're looking into those for streaming opportunities. So please get back on that. And also, I just want to say that there's a wonderful place called the Babylonian Heritage Center, where in Israel, we do have a beautiful archive and museum. And I want to thank Ephraim Sedka and also the founder of that museum, Mordechai Ben Parat, for the work they did in creating that, because what we do have is an Or Yehuda.
Great.
And it's an amazing thing. And, you know, is there something else you want to ask me? Because I am passionate about this, and I know Adriana is passionate, and it has been a group of miracles. I thank Harold for being part of all those miracles. I thank Edwin. I thank people like Lizette Joshua. I thank everyone that was part of this. You know, it's such an important thing to preserve your history for the next generation. And that really is the essence of what the film is about, saving the Iraqi Jewish archives for the next generation, so that we can continue to be proud Iraqi Jews and proud of our roots in Iraq and proud of the Iraqi people. Because one thing I learned being part of the Coalition Provisional Authority is that it is an amazing country, and there are amazing good people there. And we need to keep that spirit alive. So I urge anybody who is an Iraqi, please, this is an issue of showing the diversity of that culture. And this is something that Saddam Hussein wanted not to be available. And you can make it available to the world and to the Iraqi Jews, but only if it's kept with the Iraqi Jews. And that personal property, school certificates and things like that, that were from the archives of the Frank-Ini School, from the library of the Frank-Ini Schools, are returned to the appropriate people, the students that were there, and that the rest is made available to others through museums. This is an amazing opportunity that we have to change history or to forget history. And
Thank you
change
so
history
much,
means-
Carole. I want to respect everyone's time, so I want to thank you all for participating. I hope that you will continue to participate in our online programs. If there is a silver lining to this crisis as a cultural institution, it's that we can bring people together from all over the world to hear from people like Carole and Harold and Lynn and Edwin and Gina and all the other people who have been leading on this issue tirelessly for many, many years now. So thank you all so much for joining. Stay safe, and to continue staying involved, please visit our website, www.JIMENA.org. Take care, everyone. We're going to end this session now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.